Good morning, everyone. So welcome here to this event. It's very glad to see so many of you here to discuss these two very important and related topics of the Brazilian elections and the cooperation between Norway and Brazil regarding the governance of the Amazon. As many of you know, Brazil held general elections, both national and subnational, at the beginning of this month. In the presidential elections, former President Lula had 48% of the votes, and current President Bolsonaro had 43% of the votes. Since none of them had more than 50%, we have a runoff now in the 30th of October. And we're here partly to discuss this scenario that came from the elections and the scenario regarding the potential results. But at the same time, according to both sides, actually, and most analysts, there is a lot at stake in these elections, not least how the Amazon is governed. Norway has been a key partner in the cooperation about the Amazon, most emblematically to the Amazon Fund, which, as you know, this partnership has been somewhat strained recently, which it is included also freezing the Amazon Fund resources for new projects. So we are here with two great speakers, I think one of the best speakers we have to talk about these topics here in Norway. We have Livia Costa-Kramer, who is a senior advisor from the Norwegian Ministry of Environment and Climate, who has experience working in the Norway's initiative for international climate and forest initiatives in NICFI. She has also a long experience working in bilateral programs with Brazil, including the Amazon Fund, and also has served for 2 years as climate and forest envoy at the Norwegian Embassy in Brasilia. So please, Livia, join us. And we also have Dr. Livia Costa-Kramer, sorry, should correct, Dr. Yuri Kasahara, who is a researcher from at the Oslo Met University. Is part of the Norwegian Institute for Urban and Regional Research, the NIBIR, and is the vice president of the Norwegian Association for Latin American Studies, NALAS. Yuri has a PhD from the UPEG at Rio de Janeiro. His research addressed several topics, mostly pertaining to several dimensions of Brazilian politics and society. His publications have appeared in places like the British Journal of Political Science, Comparative Politics, and Brazilian Journal of Environmental Science. So please, Yuri, join us. We'll have this chat. I can go in the middle. Yeah. We have this chat with Livia and Yuri for about 50 minutes, and then we open the floor for Q&A. So let's start perhaps with a bit of the both backgrounds, the elections and the bilateral cooperation between Norway and Brazil. Yuri, can you please give us a background about these elections? Why it's so important for the future of Brazilian democracy?
Sure. First, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about Brazilian politics with Olivia and you, Lucas. I thank you all for coming here, like in this rainy morning, to hear about Brazil. I think one main topic at stake during this election was to understand and to assess the size or the importance of Bolsonaro and the more radical right in Brazil. Because in 2018, many people were surprised that Bolsonaro was elected, and this election became a sort of referendum on his government, but also on how. What was the importance of the more radical right or conservative right in Brazil? And as we are going to discuss later, I believe, it showed that Bolsonarismo, or like this radical right, is bigger than Bolsonaro, as the results in Congress showed. That's one important, more broader topic that was at stake in this election. And the more specific stake at this election was, for me, actually what would be the reaction of Bolsonaro to the election results. Because for those that haven't followed this campaign, there was a constant attack from President Bolsonaro to the credibility of the electoral system, and he himself said that he wouldn't accept the defeat, and so there was a lot of expectations about how he could react to a loss or a bad result in the polls in the election day. And surprisingly, he behaved well so far. So he didn't talk that much about electoral fraud, but more about how the institutes that do the polling were wrong and probably biased. So his attack actually focused more on the survey institutes. So I think that's like the broader scenario, and we can discuss more how the results for Congress actually show and will sort of shape the work or like the future government, whoever wins.
Thanks, Yuri. Yeah, and Livia, can you also give a bit of the historical context and trajectory of cooperation between Norway and Brazil?
Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here. Yes, so the partnership between Norway and Brazil on climate and forests started back in 2008, so 10 years before the last elections. At that time, actually, both governments met at the Conference of the Parties in Bali. Brazil got there with this methodology or this model of cooperation that it presented to the international community, which was in some like the Amazon Fund. That meant that Brazil, who was already in the trajectory of reducing deforestation since 2004, they want to actually ask the world to recognize the efforts they were doing in reducing deforestation in the forms of what we call the results-based payments. And Norway arrived there with this new initiative, the Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiative. So it was like, I would say, a perfect match at the time. Both countries had this common goal, which was to reduce deforestation and protect the tropical forests in the world. So Brazil was the first bilateral partnership for the Norwegian Climate and Forest Initiative. As I mentioned, at the time, Lula was president, and he had already set in place massive measures to achieve this, big reductions since 2004. So what he did, it's important to mention, it will be relevant also for the discussion later, was to first put in place an action plan to preserve and reduce deforestation, the acronym is PPCDAM, which was supervised by the presidency itself, the Casa Civil as we call it. And it was like a cooperation between more than 10 ministries. They created new protected areas. They were also open to create new indigenous peoples' territories. They prioritized law enforcement together with satellite monitoring and the work that INPE, the Special Research Institute, had done for many, many years since 1988 in like monitoring deforestation in the Amazon. So there was a lot of initiatives that made possible for Brazil to succeed in reducing deforestation in the region. PPCDAM also had carrots, the sticks, as I mentioned, reducing deforestation, law enforcement, make a list of the municipalities that deforested more so that they could prioritize actions toward those places. But it also had intentions of contributing to the sustainable development in the region. So the idea of with the presentation of the Amazon Fund was the funds that would come into the fund would help Brazil to implement those policies. Yes, so that's the beginning, and I mean, we have had more than 10 years of cooperation, and not everything were like roses, right? It was an innovative mechanism. It was new. Norway bet on that, you know. Amazon Fund was new. I mean, they didn't even know how to start, but we believe that Brazil would be able to work in giving the political signals that were, you know, given at the time. I think I'll stop there. Much we can talk, and we can, yeah.
Perhaps if you want to talk a bit more about how the fund works and has been implemented, why there was the freeze in the new project fundings.
Sure, yeah. So the Amazon Fund, as I said, it was created to help Brazil implement, to co-finance Brazil's policies toward the Amazon. With the results achieved in reduced deforestation, Norway made payments of a total of 8.3 billion Norwegian kroners, around 1.2 billion US dollars, from 2008 to 2018, which was the last payment that came in from Norway. So the fund, throughout this period of time, supported more than 100 projects. The majority of the projects went to civil society organizations, including indigenous peoples associations. But there was also the most part of the money disbursed went to projects with public institutions. And by public institutions, I mean municipalities, state-level agencies, and federal agencies as well. So it's important to have it in mind, because that's one of the things we heard with this new government, that most of the money were going to the civil society organizations, which wasn't right. So the fund helped implement many and strengthen many of the policies in Brazil, like strengthening conservation unities and indigenous peoples' territory, strengthening the organizations as well. Civil society organizations. It helped like the environmental registry of private properties in order to identify who is deforesting legally or not, you know, and illegally. And so that we could have this, you know, you could really do this diagnostic and actually make those people responsible for their actions. So they went to many important projects that we heard from others throughout the years, helped the implementation of policies, but also gave a space for innovation that those organizations wouldn't have had without the fund. So that was a very interesting feedback that we received of the fund. And when we talk about the Amazon Fund, it's important also to talk about the governance of the fund. The governance, as it was presented to Norway, was composed of 2 committees with representations from the states of the Amazon, the 9 states of the Amazon. One of the committees, the guidance committee had the presentation from the states of the Amazon, civil society organizations, and important ministries, so the federal level. So when it was presented to Norway, it was innovative. I don't think we had any other kinds of governance structure like that internationally. And it gave us a sense of security that the people that really know the context and really know what's going on the ground, they are represented there. And having the government and have the states and having the civil society organization also kind of maintain this system of checks and balances, which helped Norway take the decision not to be part of this governance structure. And that's not usual for Norway to do. We support other multilateral initiatives where we take part in the governance structures of those. But we want Brazil, because of the way it was designed, and because we wanted Brazil to have the ownership and want the fund to be 100% Brazilian, we didn't want to take part of this. And then there was also another committee called the CTFA. It's a technical committee. It was basically the committee that validated the results from reduced deforestation and actually communicated, like, this year, for this forest year, Brazil reduced deforestation with so much and is entitled of so much, for results-based payments. So the reason why I'm explaining this is because we're going to the next, the question about the freeze, why it happened. And so in beginning of 2019, with the new government, there was a decree issued by the government saying that basically wanted to reduce the participation of civil society organizations in Brazil in different committees, where there was like a cooperation between civil society and public institutions. So when this decree was issued, we understood that this would affect the agreement we have with the Amazon Fund, with BNDES, which is the Brazilian Development Bank. Because we have a legal agreement with the bank on the Amazon Fund. And we got in touch with the government, at the time the Ministry of Environment, and communicated that, make them aware of the situation. We were assured that the decree wouldn't influence the committees of the Amazon Fund. At the same time, they expressed that they really want to talk about the composition of the committees and would like to suggest some changes as well. We were open for a dialogue, but still worried that the decree would, come into force before we reached this, agreement. And that's what happened. I think 5 weeks later, the decree went into force. And then some weeks later again, there was a new decree issued by the government saying that only those institutions will be able to continue. So, and the guidance committee of the COFA, the guidance committee of the Amazon Fund, and the technical committee, they worked on that decree. So basically, it was suspended, both of the decrees. It implied actually a breach of contract with Norway. And we tried to, continue a dialogue and to understand what are the changes that they foresee and they want to. But there wasn't really a very room for negotiations. We understood very quickly that the intention was to really have the civil society organizations not participating or have a minority participation at the committee. And that was actually a big and important issue for us based on what I just told, in the beginning of the partnership with the composition of the fund. And given also the importance that the civil society organization in Brazil have in protecting the forest and in finding innovative ways of, using the forest at the same time as they keep it standing. So there was also at the time you might remember, in July, August 19, the deforestation increased a lot. There was a lot of fires. It caught the attention of the international community. Europe, there were a lot of letters being sent to Brazil at, the following fall. So we found out that, okay, when you don't have a guidance committee of the fund that actually has a function in their dialogue with the Amazon Fund team, the fund cannot work, they cannot approve new projects because there are some kind of projects and calls that they needed this interaction with the governance committee as well. So we got in touch with our partner, which, legal partner, which is still BNDES, the Development Bank, and asked them to hold the support to new projects but continue supporting the ongoing projects, the projects that were already signed before the decree was issued. I think it was in May or around that year. So so that was an interim alternative we found, given the situation of the breach of contract as well. At the same time as we tried to engage and engaged at times with the Brazilian government, first with the Minister of Environment, later with the Vice Presidency and the Vice President himself, in trying to find ways and negotiate, and solve the problem that appeared.
Olivia, for the background and thinking about how the perspectives. I want to ask you, in each of the potential scenarios, what can we expect about the new government? Which kind of will be their priorities, and especially what potential implications for how they might govern the Amazon rainforest?
Yeah. Well, Livia gave a very detailed background of the working of the Amazon Fund, and I learned a lot here now. But I think it's very important to have in mind also that the environment and climate change was not a topic at all during this campaign, from both sides actually. The only signaling towards a related topic was from the candidate, former President Lula, that said that if elected, he would create a ministry for indigenous people, as the indigenous people were organized a lot during the Bolsonaro government to oppose many of the deregulation that Olivia mentioned in the Amazon. So it's just because I know that in Norway we're very aware and interested in this topic, but it's just to have a clear that for Brazilians during this campaign and for the main candidates, climate change, environment was not a topic at all. Like, it was very barely mentioned during the campaign. And that's important to have in mind when we talk about scenarios, right? Because let me come back to what was the Congress that we got with the elections now in October. If you see, strictly speaking, in terms of left and right, it didn't change that much. In terms of the left, what is called left in Brazil, maintain about 1/5 of the seats in Congress, or in the lower chamber, like the Chamber of Deputies. About 140, if you stretch a little bit the concept, the definition, 150 seats. Brazil has 31 seats in Congress, so it's about 1/5. And then the rights sort of kept the rest, basically. But what happened there is that there was basically an internal change on the right, what we call right and center right, with radicalization within the right. Basically, center-right parties, moderate parties, such as the PSDB, that was the former main electoral adversary of the PT, the Labour Party in Brazil, was basically disappeared. It has only one governor that is in a runoff election in Rio Grande do Sul. They lost the election in São Paulo state. That was the main sort of flagship government, state government that they had. And in Congress, they, if I remember correctly, they have a meager 8 seats in the Chamber of Deputies. So that represents an important shift, because now Bolsonaro, for instance, or the parties that support President Bolsonaro, they had about 240 seats, and easily he can achieve like a working majority if he elected to actually change the constitution. And also, that's only the Chamber of Deputies. And the Senate also, he got increased his support. Just to now, many ministries, former ministries, were elected to the Senate. Former Minister of the citizenship ministry, Damares, the vice president, former vice president Hamilton Mourão, was elected also to the Senate. His former science and technology minister, Marcos Ponte, was elected to the Senate. So you have just to give an idea of the balance of forces, like you have 13 senators that are strongly aligned to Bolsonaro, were part of his government, were allied, were like supporting him during his whole period, while the left in the Senate has the same 13, the whole sort of left-leaning parties. So basically, and then you have like the right parties that are natural supporters of Bolsonaro, had been supporters, that give him a strong majority in case he's re-elected. So it means that if Bolsonaro is elected, he will have a supermajority that is able to change the constitution much more easily than he had during the his first period, with important consequences that we can discuss, including for the governance of the Amazon and the whole Brazilian political system and institutions. Meanwhile, if Lula is elected, he will have a much harder time, not only because his natural allies in Congress have a minority of seats, but also because he will have a hard time to bargain support in Congress. And that's very Brazilian now, like very into the details of the Brazilian system. What will be important, was important for Bolsonaro during this first mandate, and will be important for Lula if he's elected, is to achieve the golden number of 173 deputies in the chamber to avoid impeachment. Because if you have at least 173 votes in the Chamber of Deputies, you can't start the impeachment process. So I think the first priority of Lula will be try to work out a stable majority that gives him at least a peace of mind to work during his mandate. So that said, that will force Lula to even go even broader, right? And try to attract current allies of President Bolsonaro to his government. So we can discuss that more, but basically any president that elected, there will be the Congress will have a crucial role on the path to follow. Bolsonaro has a much easier one. Lula has a much harder one. And for both, the common actual challenge that we're not talking about the Amazon here directly, but will be the economy. Because the budget next year will be much more strained, because there was a lot of expenses during the campaign now, during this year, but also a lot of like the debt was postponed to pay in 2023. And that will reduce a lot the margin in the budget for big changes in the next in 2023, and that will affect, of course, the eventual efforts to improve the law enforcement in the Amazon. That because we know that during Bolsonaro government, many of the agencies that enforce environmental agencies that have a crucial role in the Amazon had important budget cuts. So yeah, we can talk more about scenarios.
No, thank you. And just with a follow-up, we also have elections for governors for state level. Can you talk a bit about the potential consequences of that constellation of power that came from the elections for governors?
Yeah, in the case of the Amazon region, many governors were re-elected, were able to make their successors if they were not running for re-election. So, for instance, in the state of Pará, Lula got the support. Éder Barbalho was re-elected, and Pará is where the main the mine from
Paragominas,
the aluminum Hydro had his operation there. was re-elected governor, and he's supporting Lula. But the governors in the Amazon, in general, some are more aligned with Bolsonaro, the majority of them. But in the statements that they had, they are also, like, during this period, many of them complain about the cut of funds, of projects that they receive from the Amazon Fund. So they play a very sort of pragmatical role there, in the sense that they, in terms of values and moral values, they in general support Bolsonaro. But in terms of if the Amazon Fund gives resources to them to improve their operations, they would gladly accept that. So there's no, I think they operate in a very pragmatical level and will continue to do so.
Thanks, Yuri, for this scenario. Livia, if I can ask you, also thinking about potential scenarios, in each scenario, which kind of governance change do you think would be relevant for further strengthening the cooperation between, or resuming the cooperation in a way, a greater cooperation between Norway and Brazil?
I will answer that, but I just want to pick up on the last point, because I was kind of smiling here, because that's what about the governors at the Amazon states. I saw very clearly how they were in the beginning, in the first year of the Bolsonaro government. Everybody actually was trying to find out how to navigate in this new context at the time. All the international communities and the governors and everyone, civil society, And I was in Brazil. I was there from July 19 to July last year. So I really experienced interacting with the governors, and I mean, they are pragmatic. And in the first year, they were really have a strong cooperation with former Minister Salles, and went to the COP in Madrid and really want to, tell the international community that you owe us money and please pay us for all the reductions we've achieved. But it didn't help because deforestation was growing up, rising a lot. So when they got back and they understood the signals from the international community, from financial institutions, from the EU with the new regulation, so they understood that, well, that's it doesn't fit, what we are hearing here domestically and what's happening out there. And so it would be very interesting to see actually how it will play, in case Bolsonaro wins, with this constellation that we see in the Congress and how they will, interact. But I mean, the states, many of them were broke and they need support, and the support come from the Amazon Fund. It was really important because what they received from the federal government had to be also prioritized into other areas than the environmental area, like health, education, which is really important. So they really stepped up, and I think they took ownership of the issue of environmental policies. They understood they had to do their work as well, and welcome, of course, the fund. They have done that all the way. So let's see how it will play from January. So what needs to be done so that we can resume the cooperation again on the Amazon Fund, but also with the federal government. I mean, Norway's position has actually been the same since the beginning, and actually we in our dialogue with the vice presidency, we reached an agreement of what was needed in order to resume the Amazon Fund again. And for us, the first point, I mean, political will translated into concrete actions. And what would be those, concrete, measurable actions would be, for example, reduction in deforestation. And that's important, an important issue for us, because that is actually and was and is the core of the partnership. In order for NICFI, we want to pay for results with emissions reductions from deforestation. That's our main goal. We can't pay if countries, not only Brazil, but any countries, tropical countries, don't deliver on those results. And so reduction, measurable reductions in deforestation is important for us so that we can start paying again. Brazil hasn't earned results since 2019 simply because it's above, like, gets very technical, but it's above a reference level that we measure against. So reduction in deforestation is important. We need to, of course, agree on the governance structure of the fund, and that's what is in our legal agreement with BNDES. It says that the parties must agree on changes of the governance structure. So that's also important for us. And we want, of course, Brazil to have an action plan or a policy that is really being implemented, because that's what is going to guide the actions of the Amazon Fund and the priority and the strategies of the Amazon Fund, because it's intended to support the implementation of Brazilian policies as well. So those are, like, important for us, principles. And there are many things that, we would like to see changed. There are many bills in Congress, environmental bills, that can weaken the situation around the Amazon, but also in the Cerrado. There are bills proposing opening of infrastructure projects in indigenous peoples' territories. There are bills trying to weaken environmental license and of big projects as well. So this political context of the Congress, I think it's going to be much harder, regardless. For Lula, if he wins, to try to change that, and if Bolsonaro wins, I don't know. I don't want to think about that because it's going to be really challenging. But there are many things they can do that can at least put Brazil back a little bit on track again.
Yeah, no. Just to follow up on this topic, because for those that don't follow Brazilian politics, I think it is also important to have in mind that Congress in the last years increased a lot its importance because of some changes that we don't have time to go deeper here. But basically, the main important election right after this one, the presidential one, will be the election of the president, the Speaker of the House. In that sense, we're becoming more and more like the US, because that will be the election will be in February next year, or in March, and the current president of or Speaker of the House, Arthur Lira, he probably will be reelected, and he has been very aggressive against the environment and or like very aggressive trying to push for environmental deregulation. And if re-elected, and probably he will, like we said, he will have a strong majority to support projects that push the regulation forward. Livia mentioned some of the projects. Another one that had been put in the commissions and probably will be put to a vote is the regulation of mining activities and allowing for more mining activities in the Amazon region. And like Livia mentioned, like weakening environmental licensing or making it faster, like Arthur Lira likes to argue, like make more efficient. And just to give an idea also how former Minister of the Environment, Ricardo Salles, he was elected to the Chamber of Deputies. And I will not be surprised if he will be the president of the Environmental Commission in Congress. That would be very ironic, but it will not surprise me. So just to have an idea, to give an idea that even if Lula is elected, Congress will have like majority, or like the center-right parties in Congress, they will have a majority to pass legislation that will weaken or can weaken environmental regulations in Brazil. So that's something to have in mind, because it's not any safeguard against that if Lula is elected.
Yeah, I mean, we have interact with a lot of our partners in civil society and others as well as states, and one thing that it was clear since the beginning of the year when we were talking about what scenarios and what can happen, and I think it's clear for everyone that regardless, even if Lula wins, it doesn't mean that we're going to, and even before we knew this composition of the Congress now, we knew and they knew that it wouldn't be easy to just, reverse the situation. And it's going to be even harder now with the composition that we are seeing at the lower house. Mm.
Let me just take this through a final question to both of you, actually, in terms of what then can be done from external actors that help govern the Amazon, and also from the Brazilian state and civil society. That because we had some progress in terms of the reforestation from 2005 more or less to 2012. So there is a process that comes before Bolsonaro that already existed, right? There is some doubts whether the same recipe could work again, even if the political will allows for that. Because you have a strong organization that you just mentioned of the several interested parties in keeping with deforestation. So, just in terms of I know that's a more kind of what else could be done, kind of from all the actors involved in a way.
Well, that's a very good question, and I don't have an answer to that. I think it's an important challenge because. We've been talking here, if Lula is elected, probably there will be an easier dialogue with the international community, the environmental discussion, climate change will have more space in the government, to be discussed and trying to find solutions. But as we said, the margin of actually implement changes will be more at the administrative level, so you could expect a strengthening of the enforcement agencies, the environmental agencies, and maybe a sort of stop and block of more deregulation in terms of legislation. But let's see, if the Bolsonaro wins, President Bolsonaro is reelected, then we will need to really rethink the strategy, because name and shame is not effective. Is not he will be sitting for more 4 years with a supermajority in Congress, with the possibility of nominate 2 Supreme Court justices in Brazil, that will not give him a majority, but will make things a little bit easier for him. If he doesn't change the Brazilian constitution to increase the number of justices to give him a majority, then he will have a line in the 3 powers of the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. Then I don't know. Then the international community in Norway will have to deal with Bolsonaro and maybe try to make concessions, much larger concessions that they would like to try to get some from him. And that's I don't know if it would be the best possible strategy, but definitely will be something that will Norway and the international community will have to consider, because up to now the international community have really been trying to play this strategy of okay, no, Bolsonaro is a pariah, and then we'll try not to have a dialogue with him. But if he sits for 4 years with this capability of reshaping Brazilian institutions, then I think a better strategy would be try to engage with him and try to actually contain these changes. But I don't know. It's a very good question.
Well, we try to have a dialogue. So I would say that our standpoint was not to have a dialogue. And we have a lot of proof of that. I can say a little bit what we did. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, if Bolsonaro wins, we really have to rethink even harder the strategy. But what we did because Norway was targeted quite soon after the new government took place, right? So we were really, what we did in order to handle the situation was actually to continue supporting those positive forces that we had and our partners that we had for many years. We increased support to civil society organizations. Norway has an indigenous peoples program that is run by the embassy. It's going to be filled 40 years next year, so it's a program that has been for a long time. So we increased support to that, and we also, for example, we have a project with private landowners that want to preserve the forest in their areas that voluntarily, that they could otherwise deforest legally based on the forest code. So we have some ways of, kind of supporting those forces at the same time as the money was still being paid from the Amazon Fund to many projects as well, especially fostering sustainable development in the region. What we also saw, given the context, as I said, I like how the states stepped up. We saw a window of opportunity to work more directly with the states and support them in, working on plans, state-level plans, climate plans. And now lately we have helped mobilize also resources from the private sector internationally for results-based payment through a coalition called LIF, so that they also can engage and have more resources directed towards the states. So of course it is a precondition that states will do their work and actually enforce the law locally and monitor deforestation. But there are companies, big companies out there really want also to engage, as Norway did through the Amazon Fund and through the federal government. So I think those were ways we found to avoid more further feedbacks, setbacks, and that's a way I hope we can continue in case Bolsonaro wins and there is a strengthening of his policies and in Brazil. So, but yeah, I feel like we're still in a limbo situation since the elections are not finished. But yeah, that's at least the way we thought, because Brazil. What we engaged with in Brazil, it's longer term, right? The importance of the Amazon forest for achieving the Paris Accord and for the services they provide also for the people living there, but also nearby, they are essential. So it's a long-term, we have a longer-term goal in helping tropical forest countries than the lifespan of a government. I agree, it's hard. 4 years can be very hard if a government in general is implementing policies that are not, helping protect forests. But still, I think we would try also to keep our minds on the goal, the ultimate goal that's further there, and then by that help everyone that's really doing a very important work in the region, because there are a lot of people doing a great work in Brazil, civil society organizations, also state employees, doing their work locally, private sector, many of them are also all concerned with the situation in the region. And a lot of people are suffering as well with the deforestation, with, less rains. It implies a lot of things, more costs for the producers and loss of their crops. And so there are so many consequences. And we try to keep our heads up and look further.
As a comment if I made, that Brazilians are the main beneficiaries of the ecosystem services that Amazon provides more than anyone. So part of the challenge is bringing those interest parties right? Making sure that they can, or how they can make sure that their interests prevail in terms of keeping the forest up and finding sustainable ways of engagement with the forest, I guess. So now we have over 30 minutes for questions for the public. If anyone, we can take rounds of two. Katarina there, and Stein.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Yuri and Livia, for the presentation and some very interesting ideas. I also learned a lot about the Amazon Fund. I confess my ignorance. I have two questions. One is regarding the religious caucus. So we talked a lot about left, center, and right, when trying to describe this new Congress that we're going to see. I work on sexual and reproductive rights, and I look at Congress as well. And one of the things we are trying to have to catch up with is the role of the religious caucus. So I was just curious if you know how they weigh in on environmental issues they had in the past 4 years. Do they leave this to other sectors of supporting caucuses that support the Bolsonaro government, for example, the agribusiness caucus? Or do they have ideas about environment, or they just vote with the other sectors of the government when it comes to environmental issues? And the second is maybe weighing on, I wanted to ask Livia, because you've been there and you've been talking to people. I'm very curious to understand why, because it's true, right? Yuri is right, like environment did not come, it wasn't discussed very much. But sometimes it comes in disguise when discussing agribusiness. So I'm trying to remember here a recent video that I watched of Senator Cátia Abreu supporting Lula and saying, I'm going to vote for Lula. You know me. I am an agribusiness person. I am a landowner in Brazil, in the west of Brazil. If we don't reverse the policies, the harmful environmental policies of the Bolsonaro government, we agribusiness people are going to suffer, because EU regulations are going to come and they're going to, exclude us from perhaps exporting soy and and beef to EU countries, right? So, giving your, unique insight into how these actors play out, I'm wondering.
I guess we can answer because this, and then we can go for then I have a Stein in Turkey as in the line. Please, can.
Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay. Well, regarding the religious caucus, that's actually interesting, because I was just reading the sort of because the religion was a big issue during the campaign, and there had been a lot of political divisions between, for instance, evangelicals and Catholics, and Catholics supporting more Lula, evangelicals supporting more Bolsonaro. And evangelicals in Brazil, they have this religious caucus for you in Congress, for those that don't follow Brazilian politics so close. But actually, I was reading, I was checking like the number of Congress deputies that were elected. Actually, if you see nominally those that say position or present themselves as evangelicals, they reduced. I think it was from 83 to 67. And then we can speculate why, but one interesting aspect is that the Bolsonaristas, or like the Bolsonaro candidates, they sort of capture also this part of this discourse of family values, moral values that evangelicals build their electoral careers on. So you have this combination of Bolsonaristas being very moral conservatives against abortion, against gay rights, but at the same time, basically, it's almost like a extreme right Republican, right? Is the pretty much they align in the same values, and they captured this part, and I think some of these changes within the right and the reduction of the evangelical caucus in Congress is can be explained by that. Regarding environmental issues, actually evangelicals also are worried about the environment. I can remember here like the work of a colleague that does research about evangelicals and environmental issues, and they show similarly like concerns as other religions, Catholics, but to what extent this is actually sort of explored and work out, I think it's is not well understood, and not especially from environmental groups, because they don't see religion as a natural topic to engage or to discuss environment with, or to take the religious debate and then connect with the environmental debate. I think Livia has more to say about it, because I remember that in the event that you organized, we invited a representative of this ecumenic dialogue. And he was very interesting and much more positive than...
Yeah. I mean, we Norway support an initiative called the Interreligious Initiative. It's called IRI, it's the acronym, and it's not only in Brazil but worldwide. And so we have a person in Brazil that works with all religions and interact with different leaders, religious leaders, evangelicals, Catholics, Buddhists, and so forth, and also indigenous, leaders, shamans, and yes. So what we were told is that it's not that evangelicals and others, they don't care about the environment, and there are two things. Some of them don't have the knowledge, and they are acquiring knowledge about the environment and understanding that there doesn't need to be a dichotomy, But I think mainly when they arrange seminars and have these, workshops and discussions, the feedback he receives that, okay, it's important, but also those other values, they are more prominent, like about the family, and also other issues related to the economy, food security. That's what domains, their agenda. And therefore, many of them end up being supporters, the majority of the evangelicals of Bolsonaro as well. But there are evangelical leaders that have shifted, from Bolsonaro to, more to the center. So I think it's a question of what we see also with elections. Brazilians, more than 80% of Brazilians, they support, the protection of the Amazon, but that doesn't necessarily reflect in the decision when they go, and vote, because there are other issues that are higher up in the agenda. So, but there's Brazil has, it's wonderful, but it has a lot of challenges in many areas. So it's, it's really, So about just the question about Cátia Abreu. We had this event at the COP in Glasgow last year, where this Leaf Coalition, signed memorandum of understanding with the consortium of the Amazonian states. I think all the 9 governors, almost all the 9 were present at the COP in Glasgow. And it was like a document, an informal document, saying that they would like to cooperate, with Brazil, this coalition, so that Brazil, if they reduce deforestation, there are resources to come and to be rewarded. And Cátia Abreu was present at this event, and she got a stage and talked, and so she's. What do we see? Our reading about the agricultural sector is that there is a device, between the large producers that export the products, and then you have the small producers and people that the forest as a way of land speculation, and then and actually service the the domestic market. So and that's where the tension gets, because the large producers, the one exporting, they will feel first the effects of the EU regulation or of international investors that are asking for more sustainable investments, in their practice. There are a lot of things happening outside internationally that will affect the larger producers first. And we see that, our understanding is that the majority of the Bolsonaro supporters, they are part of this medium size and smaller producers. We have also settlers and really family farming. I'm not talking about them, but there are different levels of and sizes between those in the agriculture, environment.
Steinfeld.
Yes, thank you. It was very interesting to listen to, and quite a pessimistic picture, I guess, overall. I wanted to ask something that you partly answered already, actually, and that was, you said the point that environmental issues and the Amazon was not really an issue in the campaign at all. So I wanted to ask, so what are people's opinions about it? And you already said that most voters say that they support protecting the environment at a very abstract level. But what do they think about the concrete policies that Lula carried out, and that amongst those, including those that Norway supported? The second thing I wanted to ask was regarding some of the basis for Bolsonaro's support, and specifically, to what extent do you think that international actors pressure towards the government in terms of doing more to protect the Amazons and so on, can form the basis of a kind of a nationalist reaction to international intervention, and therefore that external actors actually contribute to strengthening the support of Bolsonaro?
Yeah.
No, do you want to start?
You can start.
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah.
No, those are good questions.
Yeah.
Regarding the climate, like Livia mentioned, like when you see the surveys, like the support for Amazon to preserve the forest, the Amazon forest or the Pantanal, normally is on the 80%, 75% in favor, right? They're very high. But like I said, there is this paradox. But people, when they are going actually to vote, they don't really put this on the top of the agenda because they have other priorities, right? Like health, education, the economy, moral values. Often the environment goes down there. But on the other hand, also, it's a little bit a weird situation because recently, who is very in favor of the green shift is the business sector, because there are some plans like to expand wind offshore production, and recently there had been the OTC, this oil trade in September before the election, and was booming with people interested in investing in wind offshore. So there is like the business sector actually is more interested in the green shift than the government because they see the potential of Brazil in renewables, both solar and wind. But that's like the paradox, right? Because Bolsonaro could leverage that and use that to campaign. Oh, Brazil is going to be one of in the forefront of the green shift. We're going to invest more in renewables. but there was nothing in the campaign about that, right? So, and that's like a paradox, because he really doesn't care about that. I think that's a strong sign that he doesn't care about green shift, climate, environment, and that reflects also in the debate and in the voters, right? What they put on the priority. Regarding the international pressure, I think also that's an interesting point, because Bolsonaro leveraged this, as you mentioned, very strategically to say, look, these foreigners, these globalists, people, they want to decide what we are going to do with our country, and we have to take them out, right? We can't allow that. That's very clear in the Bolsonarist memes and chats and the social media. That you are right, like it's leverage. He leveraged that to create a sort of nationalistic support base, or like to sort of make his base more active. Who was that like in the campaign now? Oh, Mark Ruffalo, because he supported Lula on his Twitter account, and the Bolsonaristas immediately after were like making fun of that. Oh, see, these Hollywood people, they want to like support Lula, and like they are foreigners that want to take over the country. So that is used strategically by his base, definitely.
I agree with that, and that's something we felt as well.
Norway was attacked a lot. Also.
Yes, believe me, bots and everything. There was misinformation. But what I saw, for me, it was very interesting, because I've been working with at NICFI since 2014. So, and I mean, with the Amazon Fund support, and there was, always we have this dialogue with civil society. They wanted more access to the funds. We always have these discussions and, sometimes complaints and, the fund should do that and that. So when it happened with us that they were suspicious of the fund, and then it led to the freeze of the funds, I was very surprised to see the massive support that we received from civil society organizations, but from the public prosecutors and many people from different areas and the states, the Amazonian states. There was the first time we saw, actually people expressing their support for this partnership so loudly, and that in spite of like attempts of it was actually fake news about Norway in a certain time that we had to counteract. But also journalists, they had an important role. I also saw a shift, because before there was not much that was being written about Brazilian politics on the environment. They always received less place in the journal, in the newspapers. But then, and the questions we received, we knew that, okay, they really don't know what's happening before, Bolsonaro. But they understood how the tactic was played. So the questions that came to us through the embassy was more like really more investigative journalism, trying to understand what's happening and actually publicizing information that was like, not biased or more correct. So so that's. I hope I addressed the first question on that. On if the international community helped strengthen Bolsonaro's supporters, it's difficult. I mean, for us to know. I mean, our understanding is that the support we received shows us the contrary, and we even saw people that. Voted for him before, now changing their positions, and saying that now I won't vote for him because of different issues as well, not only the environment, but also the way he handled the pandemic. And just one thing I want to, going back to the first question about I remember when the people, that are preoccupied with the environment not voting, still voting for Bolsonaro. The first week after the last election, when he won, I was in Brazil for a mission. And then it was very interesting for me to see 2 days after he won, he said that he would actually abolish the Ministry of Environment. Yeah, and that's something he had said in the elections, you know, during elections. He got criticized and he went back on that. He said, no, I will keep the Ministry of Environment. But then 2 days after, he announced that he would suspend it. He would finish the Ministry of Environment. And he received massive responses on Twitter from voters saying, but come on, Mr. President, I vote for you because you said you wouldn't do that, and now you're saying you're going to do that. So in the course of 2 days, I remember when I was just about to get into the plane back to Norway, he announced, no, I will keep the Ministry of Environment. So it's a very interesting, as this is a paradox, how they, you know, what the things they are worried about are, you know, reflected in the elections, but still people are kind of following and make some pressure here and there when it's, you know, things are at stake. Yeah, it's a very difficult constellation. Yes.
So one comment on the question about pushback, backlash of foreign criticism. There is some very interesting new experimental evidence from some colleagues in Brazil, showing that, you know, you have an overall sentiment of rejection of foreign criticism, but you actually only have defiance kind of actually create a sentiment of reducing cooperation and actually reacting to that among very nationalistic voters. So kind of like those who are already in Bolsonaro's basis. So I think it would be one evidence that the limits are quite limited for those that are already in the Bolsonaro basis of foreign criticism. May not be effective, as we might know, but at the same time, it may not create a stronger coalition of nationalism. That's taking this one piece of experimental evidence. Toshka,
Thank you. Thank you both, Livia and Yuri, for sharing your experience and insights with us. My name is Torcia Lera. I just published a book about Brazil and Bolsonaro and democracy, so I find this extremely interesting. I have one question for each of you. First, Yuri, in your presentation, you said, I think you were quite modest or maybe diplomatic. I think we can easily say, and the discussion here shows it, what's at stake in these elections is actually democracy itself, a well-functioning democracy itself in Brazil. And I think the Bolsonaro's proposal now, after the first round, of augmenting the number of ministers in the Supreme Court with 5, so he can indicate not only 2 but 7. I think that's a clear signal of attacks on democracy itself, you know, in addition to everything he has done for the last 4 years. But my question to you is, I think you said that the radical right in Brazil now is bigger than Bolsonaro, and that these elections, they show that. I'm really curious, because it could also be seen the other way around, that the popularity of Bolsonaro himself, the person-focused populist Bolsonarismo, draws attention and votes to his party, which now is the biggest in Congress, which used to be very small, and to other candidates that publicly support him. So, just curious about how you understand this situation. How is the far right bigger than Bolsonaro? And then the second question, Livia. Lucas pointed out the massive reduction in deforestation early in the 2000s, actually during the first Lula government, and talked about the same recipe. How could it be repeated? And 3 of the most important points were, of course, recognizing more indigenous territories and establishing more protected areas, more command and control in the field, in the Amazon, and also trying to limit the access to financing and to market for the actors operating in illegality. These 3 measures were extremely efficient back in the early 2000s. So could they be repeated? And more specifically, what could the federal government, if Lula is now elected, what can the federal government do alone? And what kind of support do they need from Congress in order to forward these 3 measures or other that you think are important? Thank you.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
You go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, maybe I was too diplomatic because when I was preparing to this talk, I was trying to not get depressed. So I was like, so maybe I tried to hold my horses. And, but you're right. Like I'm very scared if Bolsonaro wins, what Brazilian institutions will become. Definitely. Well, but regarding the other question, I think that's yeah, no, I think it's one impression that I have that I said that Bolsonarism is bigger than Bolsonaro itself. It could be, like I said, if Bolsonaro doesn't win, is not reelected, this sort of extreme right movement will lose its face and this forefront figure and decay. But I'm not so sure anymore. I thought that 4 years ago. No, Bolsonaro was just like a outlier, a glimpse. Next elections, things will be back to normal. But after 4 years and with these election results, I'm not so sure anymore because, especially because the center right was sort of decimated. It disappeared, like PSDB, like it's gone, like, right? And I think that will be the new sort of polarizing force in Brazil in 2026. And even though Bolsonaro is not the forefront figure, hopefully, there will be his representatives or people aligned with his values or way of thinking leading this. And that's an important shift in Brazilian politics. And that's, I think, it's something that we'll have to deal with in the near future. So that's why I think, unfortunately, Bolsonarismo or this like sort of or the values that he defends and are to stay in Brazilian politics, are going to stay.
About repeating the recipe, I don't think if Lula wins, he can just repeat the recipe because things have changed. And that's something that they also saw throughout the time, you know, this past 10, 15, 14 years. Like the PPCD, they had a part of the sticks with the command and control and the carrots, fostering sustainable development. And the evaluations of the PPCD, the last one, PPCD 3, show that the part of the carrots, fostering sustainable development from the government, financial incentives, you know, it came short compared to the carrots. And that's also is related to the way deforestation happens because deforestation patterns change. You know, before it was like large areas, easy to detect, easy to enforce, to do command and control. Later it was happening in small areas, much harder to detect with local production because they didn't have the technology, the understanding how to produce in a sustainable way. Many of the small producers. So we have to think differently, provide technical assistance so that they could produce more effectively in smaller areas, for example. That was one of the support that came from the Amazon Fund, for example. So, and I think with the demands coming also from the international community, finance sector, investors, Lula has to think differently. And we have kind of seen that during the election. He has talked. His position is not only protect the forest and close it, but we have to work with the agricultural sector as well because they have an important role. So so that's the way I see going forward. You know, have this interaction, recognizing the importance of the agricultural sector, and working with financial sector and investors as well. While yes, really strengthening. The management of protected areas, including indigenous peoples' territories. That's where we have seen the most a large increase in deforestation lately. And then we have also all these undesignated lands where we have seen most of deforestation happening. So they have to actually protect those areas as well. They have to define and protect them. So yeah, so I think that there has been a shift and they will have to take that into consideration in order to succeed. What will the government can do by itself and depend of the Congress? I mean, a decision to start recognize indigenous peoples' territories again, I guess, lies in the executive branch. So that's something they could do. The budget's going to be a really hard issue, as you pointed out. But apart from not having enough money, there was also the issue of the budget ceiling that was, implemented in 2016. So I can give an example. The Amazon, we gave an exemption from the Amazon Fund to support operations of Obama in 2016. And the way it is today, so if the government says we are going to put 100 million to command and control activities, fiscalization as they call it, the part coming from BNDES is about 40%. That's what BNDES can support. The rest the government has to support. So if you put a budget ceiling on 100, it doesn't mean, the money from the Amazon Fund, that is like kind of external money, it comes into the budget ceiling. So what we have talked to many partners is how can you change the situation so that the government budget is 100 and then you can have the Amazon Fund on the top of that. And changing the budget ceiling is extremely hard and difficult, and that would require Congress approval. So that's one challenge we see on this regard, And so I don't know, access, finance. Yeah, there are things also that MAPA, the Ministry of Agriculture, can initiate. Like the ABC program, which is low carbon agriculture program, in order to incentivize, more sustainable production. I think they could do that themselves, but again, the budget and all those issues are still a concern. So yeah, there are for sure more things we can analyze later. But yeah.
We have time for one short question followed by 2 short answers. If anyone has any.
So thank you so much, Livia and Yuri, for this presentation. It was really fantastic. I learned so much. And I would ask about the agribusiness caucus, because we've been saying about the religious caucus and how the agribusiness is dealing also with the situation. But I would like to ask about the food prices internationally, and if this is something that could affect, for example, a second commodity boom in Brazil, and how this could be interesting to deal in the future, in the next government, and how the economical crisis could be arranged through this. Thank you so much.
I just want to go back to what happened in 2008 or 9 or 7, around that time, when deforestation was really decreasing and the agricultural production was rising. It was like the graphics were like, this way. What showed that Brazil at the time was able to increase production without by decreasing deforestation at the same time. So, and how did they do that? By producing more effectively in smaller areas, by not degrading the soil in a way that it just have to move to another patch. So that's something we have talked to Brazil throughout the years, that they have the knowledge and to do that. And we have talked to agricultural sector, like I was in Mato Grosso once and talked to the people there as a strong agricultural state. And I pointed that out. Have the knowledge, how to do that. There are studies evidencing that Brazil doesn't have to open any more land in order to produce more and to actually attend the demand that might come from internationally. So that's something we keep saying and hoping that the agricultural sector will actually take ownership of and then implement.
Oh, but just to maybe not be so optimistic, but on the other hand, you have studies that show that when the commodity prices go up, deforestation increases, especially in the border areas, right?
Yeah.
Because you have not the big producers, the exporters, but you have more incentives for smaller, medium-sized farmers to increase their land, and they do that by deforestation. So you definitely have maybe a not so optimistic scenario if there is a commodity prices boom. now. But on the other hand, it's we don't need to talk about the international economy because it's very uncertain right now because we don't know if we are going actually towards a depression or recession, probably, and so it's very uncertain. And inflation actually has been a problem in Brazil, and that's regarding to the prices and commodity prices. And a lot of economists are actually worried about next year also regarding inflation because in this last 6 months there has been put so much money in the economy, like for the government, Bolsonaro was trying to being more popular and has been pumping up money into the economy that will make much harder for the central bank to achieve their inflation goals next year. So probably going to see at the same time an inflation, but also an increase in interest rates that will make the scenario, economic scenario for next year, like much bleaker.
On this cheerful note, we reached our time, and so I want to thank you everyone for coming. It was really nice to have the opportunity to learn from both of you and also from the contributions of the audience. Hopefully we can do another one perhaps next year talking about the progress that has been done in the Amazon.
Yes.
Let's see. But yeah, thank you very much. Have a good day to all.
Thank you so much.